Annie, welcome to the podcast. It's really great to connect with you again.
Oh, hi, Alex. Yeah, really good. We were just saying the last time we spoke on my podcast, it was 2019.
Yeah.
So really good.
And were you on my previous podcast before that conversation or after?
Yes.
Before. And was that 2019? Because I think they were quite close.
I think they were, weren't they? So yeah, the one we did on mine was October 2019, because I was actually just listening to it before, and we were talking about spirituality in terms of health. And then I think it was just a little bit earlier where we were talking about the birth of a mother and matrescence and kind of the transition into motherhood.
Yeah. And we're going to kind of, I guess, return to some of those themes and conversations today. So before we dive into that, for those people that might not have listened to either of those episodes, are you happy just to do a little bit of an intro and a background into who Annie Breen is?
I'll give you the short version. The elevator for a tall building. So I'm Annie. I have a nearly 6-year-old little girl who was born on the summer solstice, and she is full of spirit. I'm married to Dan. I live just south of Edinburgh, and I work with mums, so specifically exhausted mums who are done with quick fix solutions that want to restore their energy. And in that, it's really looking at the identity piece as being the most instrumental piece of the energy puzzle, which I'm sure we'll get into. I'm an NLP master prac, I'm a nutritional therapist, and I'm a transformational coach. So those are some of the tools that I pull out the bag. And it's interesting because I'm about to launch a new podcast, and I'm stuck on recording the kind of first episode because I don't know where to start, because my journey is kind of, I've gone through certain chapters as we do. And last year, I'd made so much kind of progress and so many changes in my life after having Bonnie, and identifying these gaps that mums fall through, and then kind of building a program out of that and working with mums. And it was great. And then 2021 was hard. There were a couple of different things that happened it was really, really hard. So I almost had to kind of come back to myself. We get so used to kind of giving. And I think we spoke about that in the last podcast, about this kind of human giving syndrome, and always kind of giving our energy outward, that I just needed to come back to me and what was important to me, what I needed from a health perspective. So that's what I've been doing. I haven't been doing too much work since November. I've just kind of been focusing on my health. I've had some hormonal imbalances, some nervous system stuff. And I'm actually feeling so much better now. But I think it's embodying the work that I do and identifying the lessons that I'm still to learn a little bit more. Sorry if that's a little bit vague, but that is where I'm at now.
Brilliant. And yeah, I think, there's health and life is obviously one long journey, isn't it? And we were saying off air, parenthood is sort of a roller coaster. It's kind of riding the highs and the lows, and appreciating that we don't really control large chunks of what might happen in our day. For example, for everyone listening, Annie and I were meant to speak a week or two ago, and Oscar decided to suck on the end of my laptop charger, break it, and then I had no laptop for the day. So these are the things that can happen.
Well, Bonnie turned our bedroom into a pirate ship this morning, so I've literally just been like putting it back. It's exciting, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, I think you've got to frame it that way. What's going to happen today?
Go on.
No, after you.
I think it depends on what day, from a mother's point of view, a female point of view. Depends on what day of my cycle she decides to turn the bedroom into a pirate ship, or like the whole living room into a den, and take all the kitchen table chairs into the living room. That does depend on where I'm at in my cycle, but yeah, it's fine.
Most of the time. So talking about these kind of, I guess, identity, do you want to sort of expand on what you mean from this perspective, and maybe kind of how that's developed for you?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny when I reflect back over my whole life, I think I was always trying not to fit in. I wanted to be different. I wanted to be individual. And I have a human need, like for significance, to be noticed for that. And that's interesting because I think I've just always been on this search to find myself and not necessarily go with the crowd, with the tide. Some things just didn't feel right for me. So that was quite hard as a teenager. I remember specifically, like when I was 13, I used to do competitive dressage, and I had a job offer to be the head groom of one of the Olympic riders. And that would have opened up so many different paths and opportunities for me, but it wasn't what my soul was being called to do. And obviously at the time, 13, didn't know that language about spirit and passion and purpose and all this stuff. It just didn't feel right in my body. And I remember being very upset in this caravan on this yard that I'm not going to go with this. I'm going to choose something else, in the words of Train Spotting, which kind of happened after. And it was this kind of mission to find who I was. And then I went down the path of festivals and music and all that kind of stuff. And skipping forward a bit, getting into motherhood, that brought all of the kind of unresolved stuff, the stuff that I haven't yet acknowledged or looked at, up. I said it was almost like being put on a stage and all your vulnerabilities being exposed and revealed. So it was almost like the next chapter of that. I'd come so far. I'd started studying nutrition. This is cutting a long story very short, and focusing on my health. And I'd met Dan, and had been so many different changes. But then Bonnie revealed the parts of me that I hadn't nurtured, that I hadn't looked at. And I realized there was so much stuff that I learned. Obviously, we're tired, right? And we can never underestimate the power of that word. Like, we're tired. Sleep deprivation absolutely destroyed me. And I hear it from so many mums and dads. It really, really does. Put that, into the context of your relationship and the parenting stresses and life stresses and all of this. It's really hard, pushes you to your limits. But I started to find out information that I didn't know around my family history and transgenerational trauma and this kind of thing. And I just felt like there's something that I couldn't explain, was a missing piece to the puzzle, which I now call, from an NLP perspective, the inner queen. Like, the queen is the most powerful piece in the game of chess, and it can move in every direction. It affects everything. And I think it's the same in health and identity, that there is something that ties all these patterns together. And I became very interested in patterns and cycles and this kind of thing. And I started tracking my hormonal cycle and my mood, and along with the moon. And I did some energy healing, and spoke to more energetic kind of therapists and psychic mediums and this kind of thing, as well as working with the science of functional medicine. And I found imbalances in my gut and all these kind of things that made a lot of sense. But then I started to look within around belief systems and values and inherited patterns and things that were repeating. And that's how I kind of pulled all these pieces of the puzzle together and found that, okay, you can have a really good diet. And I did make some changes, and that's hard, isn't it, when you're exhausted and you're juggling everything? So you can change your diet, you can change your behavior, you can change these kind of external factors in your environment. But if you believe you're not good enough, or you're not worthy, or you don't know what your values are that direct your life, then that's going to be draining your spirit, draining your energy. You're never going to feel fully fulfilled and happy. And I've come to realize that the human nervous system is the greatest sort of force or power of, or the identity, sorry, is the greatest power of the human nervous system, because otherwise you essentially don't have a home, right? If you don't know who you are and the things that make up your identity, there's your belief systems, your values, your emotional state, but then also there's outside forces, things that have happened to you that have changed how you believe about yourself. And this is really interesting. Like, people might think about big traumatic events, but it can also be these little events, if you look back over your timeline, that have happened, that could be these kind of drip fed events that build up like grains of sand, that make you feel that you're just, oh, not good enough, or doubt yourself, second guess yourself. And then you have these kind of battle scars that maybe you've become really hurt from that. Maybe something's happened within your family, or you've suffered some grief or loss or trauma, and it leaves these kind of wounds. And that affects your identity, but it's how we respond to those wounds. You can either wear them as badges of honor and say, this bad thing happened to me once, or this happened to me when I was growing up, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to change it, and I'm going to help people so that they don't go through the same thing. Or you can almost wear it as a victim mentality, and you almost become stuck. I find this really interesting, that when people have gone through painful, traumatic events, they almost become stuck at the age that happened. And you see that within their coping mechanisms and resilience in certain situations. And then you've got like echoes of love. So these are the people who have ever loved you. They shine through in your identity, and maybe they're not always positive. You know, people that have come into your life that have taught you something about yourself that at the time did not feel good. But on reflection, you can see the gifts. And then what we spoke about, the last thing that I think really has a huge impact is matrescence. And I believe there's a male version, patrescence too, which is this spiritual transition into parenthood. So those are the things that I kind of identified that affect our identity, which, if we're not aware of, can really be our biggest drain. So we can be trying to improve our energy and well-being and happiness, but if we're not looking within, then it's almost like pumping up a tire with a hole in it. So does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. Yeah. And I think you articulated that so well. You know, one of the ways that I describe health is, and disease is, you know, it's accumulative. It's not necessarily like this one triggering event that has led to someone's health to decline or to shift. It can be, but you still have to ask, well, why was that event enough to be able to trigger a change to someone's health? So like you say, that timeline from not even day one, but actually looking at our parents and our grandparents' health experiences, it really sheds light on every level of who we are, as you say. I think, you know, Annie, that I've been doing a psychedelic practitioner training program, and one of the first assignments we had was kind of basically to do an autobiography and to kind of reflect on some kind of key moments throughout our lives that we feel have influenced, I guess, our trajectory ultimately. And you reminded me of that with this idea of, you know, sometimes it's little things that you could easily brush off as not having any actual impact on how you relate to people or how you relate to yourself or some form of behavioral response. But actually, if you really sit down and reflect and contemplate on some of these things, then you realize that the fact that you never got into your school choir when you were 12 actually impacted your, you know, ability and confidence to express yourself and to sing, for example. And, you know, all those little things that go through, especially those kind of important years, that really impact, I think, how we develop.
Yeah, I had a client who was, I think she was 8, and she was asked to go up and read this piece of work or something, her piece of work in school. And she was just she was singled out. She didn't want to do it. She was almost forced and so embarrassed. And then I think people laughed at her and this kind of thing. And how many decades on, 3 or 4 decades on, she's working with me. She's scared to use her voice. She's scared to speak up, because back then, a person that should have known better, a teacher, could have been the, you know, the mentor in the hero's journey, but instead, you know, they were kind of instrumental, should we say, in this person feeling not good enough, feeling like, oh, they can't, what they have to say isn't useful. And it's interesting with timeline intervention, which is something I use with NLP. It's so powerful. It's not about changing the past. It's about changing your relationship with the past. And it's not about dragging it all up, but it's going back and changing the story, writing it through a different lens and looking at it through a new perspective. And I just remember from that person, she was able to understand as her adult self that that teacher knew no better, that it wasn't about her, that teacher lacked the skills, the kind of people skills at the time to be able to know to support and nurture that child. And it's just very, very interesting. I've done this so many times with so many different people in so many situations that you're able to see it through a different lens, but you're able to speak to that person. And with NLP, we get into the energy of it. So we can do it kind of disassociated, where we're looking at the memory and we can associate. And you're able to almost feel what it feels like to have that relief, to know it's not you. And the point of it is to be able to access the resources. So we believe in NLP that there's no unresourceful people, just unresourceful states, so emotional states. And that actually it sounds kind of woo and cliched that everything you need is already inside of you. So being able to go back and take the learnings forward, they then act as resources. Should you be in that situation before, it gives you the resources, the confidence to be able to use your voice, knowing that the story you're telling yourself isn't necessarily true. And I think this is huge. And another thing, do you have anything to say on the timeline thing? Because you've been doing this, right?
No, continue.
Yeah. Another thing that I'm really so aware of is parts. So another thing in NLP, we use neurolinguistic programming, which is essentially using language to program the nervous system so that we can achieve the life that we want. It's in simple terms, and access those resourceful states to be able to navigate life and progress, succeed, whatever that looks like. But we have these parts. And what tends to happen in life is that we're put under stressful situations. So going back, like as a kid growing up, a child, you don't know whether you're a good kid in a bad environment, right? So for me, I could sense stuff. Like I'm very empathic. I could feel that something wasn't right. I didn't know about my mum's traumatic past then, or wider kind of information about my family history. But you can almost feel it in the people that are around you, but I couldn't explain it. So it's being able to kind of, as I've got older, to go back and look at the parts of me that maybe were, so sorry, I lost my trail of thought then. So let me go back. So what tends to happen then is we look outside of ourselves for a model. Like, I need some guidance. I need a mentor. I need to know. We come up against a hard situation, especially in motherhood. Let's use that. We come up to parenthood. What the hell is going on? So we look outside and we think what other people are doing, right? We should do that. And the word should is like, it's like a swear word. So what are they doing? We should do that. Or we look inside and we try and pull on a similar experience. Have I been through this before? No. And what tends to happen is you split. Part of you goes fight, part of you goes flight, because we're trying to find information. We're trying to find the resources to be able to deal with this particular thing. And we kind of fall through the middle. And it's almost like the old cartoons of having the angel and the devil on your shoulder. There's part of you is like, yeah, do that thing, take that step, make that decision. That's right. The more outward kind of confidence. And the other part's like, no, don't say that. Stay small. Or no, you shouldn't be saying that. So what's really interesting, I really looked into these parts and I'm trying to kind of develop my own kind of framework with it, that some of us have many parts. And for me, one of them is the child archetype. So I notice this a lot with Bonnie, is when she is being a child, she activates the 5-year-old in me. So I'm almost coming at her. And I don't know if you've noticed this. I don't know how old your little one, Oscar, is. How old is he?
He's 1 year old tomorrow.
Okay. So maybe, okay, interesting. But 5 was a significant age for me. So sometimes, and I found that finding this age quite challenging. And I think it's because there were so many events that happened when I was 5 that when Bonnie is doing stuff and being Bonnie, it activates that 5-year-old. Mm-hmm. So I'm almost being the mirror and not the model. And I've got that mantra in my head, Annie, be the model, not the mirror. And another thing that I noticed, like mothers, we have a bottomless pit of resources of love and energy to give everyone else, don't we? Even when we're knackered and we think we haven't got anything else to give, we'll pull it out the bag. So the mother is quite active in terms of the nurturing side. The child archetype for me is very active. And sometimes the rebellious 20-year-old comes out as well. The person that doesn't always come out is the woman. So I've been really kind of aware and conscious of activating this more adult part, the woman, the more empowered person that can hold space for this. And that's it. For me, that's just kind of been game changing in terms of identifying these different parts. In NLP, we do something called parts integration, where we bring them together. And what's phenomenal with this is normally all of these parts are after the same thing. So the angry mum, like if I sometimes lose it, which I do, and rage is a horrible, horrible thing to get that angry. When you actually peel it back and you find out what that part is looking for, it's peace and control. But if you dig behind control, it's usually peace and calm and kind of groundedness. And it's very interesting then, because you can be much more compassionate about these big, strong emotions that we think are bad. And as mums, we shouldn't do that and we're going to damage our kids. But actually, where are they coming from? What are they trying to achieve? And is there another approach to be able to achieve that? And I think this is where awareness is just key, isn't it? I feel like I have many parts.
We all do. I think it reminds me of kind of the internal family systems stuff.
So it was very similar. Yeah.
I think I've only just started reading the sort of the main guy's book, but one of the points that he makes is this idea that people with, I guess, multiple personality disorder is kind of just the extreme example of what essentially we all have, which is these kind of multiple parts to ourselves. And it makes complete sense, I think. And again, as you say, trying to peel back the layer of the onion to understand, well, what's kind of underneath this? What needs is trying to be met, maybe?
Yeah.
I think it really does help us understand where some of the behaviors come from. It gives us, as you say, compassion. And it is a way to take a step back from the behavior, our response, maybe kind of a part of ourselves, and have that kind of objectivity, which can be so helpful at times.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. It's definitely been a powerful part of my work, and just the understanding of these different parts or archetypes. I think like the archetype system kind of crosses over quite nicely with these parts as well. And it doesn't need to be, it's not a complicated thing. When I'm working with someone, there's usually 2 main conflicting parts, or maybe someone has an inner conflict, like they want to go and change their career, but then they're stuck in the security of staying in the job that they're in. And you can kind of bring them together, so there's some common ground in the middle, and then you work from there. And I think I listened to Gabor Mate the other day, and he was saying that the meaning of healing is wholeness. Wholeness means healing. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve, at this state of wholeness, where all these parts can coexist together. And sometimes I need to I need to listen to little Annie, like she's got a lot to say. And sometimes I need to go with that rebellious, don't give a F kind of, 20-year-old and get stuff done. And other times it's the more logical, empowered, grounding kind of energy of the mother, the woman. And other times, it is the nurturing aspect of the mother. They're going to serve me in different ways and different things. And I think this can be really good when, some mums and dads say it's hard to swap between roles. I think just being aware, this is where that can be really, really powerful and helpful. You're still you, but it's like a team. You have this internal team that have got your back, your inner cheerleaders. And I think you can really harness them. Sometimes though, going, we were talking about the mask, the mother mask before. So my new podcast is Behind the Mother Mask, is we make these parts of ourselves wrong or bad. We don't like certain parts of ourselves. So we kind of stuff it down, or we try and hide it. And from my experience, that's where those parts kind of shout louder. The unhealed child is a huge, example. Rather than face the kind of, people call it Pandora's box or the ghosts in the walls, we just kind of drown it out. And sometimes that's by performing, perfectionism, overachieving, pretending, and all these can be such a drain on our energy and our inner peace. So actually it's about having the courage and the support, because I don't think you can do it alone, to be able to do this work and look at those parts and look at the resources and what we can learn and how we can integrate them. And that's, I guess, the word integration.
So a question coming up for me is, and we'll put your contact details obviously into the show notes, but let's just say someone, for whatever reason at this point in time, can't work with someone like yourself. Do you have any kind of go-to techniques or strategies as a way to kind of start to unpack this? Meaning, do you sit down with pen and paper and journal out some of this stuff? Do you meditate? What are kind of some of the ways that we can start to maybe explore this?
Yeah. So you're so right. So just a bit of context, the reason I kind of stopped working is I suffer really badly with PMDD. So that's when your hormones kind of aren't your friend in the luteal phase just before your period. And it's quite complex, and still people are trying to understand it, but it's to do with the fluctuations. And what I feel is my nervous system is so finely tuned, it's so sensitive that any changes can throw me off a little bit. And I've done some testing here and I can see the levels. So, there's actual imbalances, blah, blah, blah. I was diagnosed with ADHD, which is no surprise, like very inattentive and I can't focus and I'm quite hyperactive. But for females, especially women, it shows up differently. So the hyperactivity is with your thoughts. I just thought, all mums are overthinkers, all mums get overwhelmed, but this is constant. This is like having 20 tabs open on your computer in your head, or being in a room where there's 100 TVs and you've got to focus on one. So that's quite simplistic, but it was really interesting to understand this. And you know me a little bit, Alex, that I don't like to focus on diagnosis or labels, but I do use them as signposts. I think they can be quite helpful. So we've got this thing. This is the start of the journey. Where are we going to go now? And that's where, for me, we go into the NLP and the mindset and the functional medicine. The reason I bring that up is when I was feeling that way and I did access support, I have done because I just know that I need it. But say if you can't, the first thing I did was journal. And and in the past, I've kind of done this for a while and not stuck to it, but I used I had like a tracking thing. And I was kind of using that just to track my cycle. But then in the end, I kind of threw that away and just got myself a nice book. And I just put the date and then what day of my cycle I was on. And then naturally start to tune into your feelings and patterns. So if you can identify certain patterns that are cropping up, it might be at certain points of the month. If you're a woman, especially, triggers, what's come before it. For me, it's very interesting. It's not just the time of the month, it's the environment. If I'm around people who I feel I can be me and feel accepted and loved, and, I'm kind of in my home and I've got my routine, then what could be a bad time is actually so much better. So I think it's just about broadening your view, as almost like stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, what's actually going on here, and then also stepping in. So checking in with your body. Sometimes I like to imagine, what if your body could talk to you? Because I think our body is our greatest teacher and we ignore so many symptoms. So what's it saying? That niggling headache, what could that be saying? What have you eaten before that? What's gone on around it? We just delete stuff because it's normal. We normalize suffering. So it's actually being really honest with yourself and writing down your symptoms and really checking in. Where do you hold stress in the body? I didn't realize until the other day how tight my gut gets in certain parenting situations I feel I can't control, So I think it's becoming self-aware, checking in. And then the mind, what are your thoughts telling you? Is it true? I think is the best question we could ask ourselves. Have you told yourself that? Has that actually happened? I have more conversations with other people in my head that I'll ever have with them face to face. But I'm trying to change that now, which is why I probably won't have many friends. No, just kidding. And so I think it's checking in with yourself, looking out, like taking the camera back and what's going on in the environment, but also going in, check in with your body, your mind, your heart, your spirit. Does life feel in congruence with how you want things to be? Maybe you have split. You feel split because you know what you should be doing, you're just not doing it. That's a classic split kind of story that we say to ourselves, like, I want to eat well, I want to exercise, I want to take more time for me, but And I think it's really understanding those. They're not excuses, they're valid reasons, but are they true and can they be changed? So I think the quality of your life equals the quality of your questions. It's not about finding answers, it's about asking really sort of intelligent questions. And sometimes we're scared to find the answer, but we can ask ourselves that, is it true? What could that be telling me? What has led me to subscribe to that story? This is an exercise I do on uncovering beliefs. Like, what is the belief? What do I believe about myself that has led me to feel the way I do? And then on the flip side, what do I need to believe about myself? It's almost like, how do you take on the persona of the person that feels the way you want to feel? And what I find my clients find really hard is to create that vision. So a lot of us know what we don't want, but we don't know what we do want because we're scared in uncertain times, especially to create that kind of vision, that beacon that we're heading towards. So I would be brave. I'd invite people to be brave and just to create a little vision of how they want to feel. I use vision boards and stuff because I'm a very visual learner and I like cutting stuff out and sticking things on. So, you can do it like that, or you can just write it down. How would you like to feel? Is that, what would that allow you to be more of, do more of, feel more of, and start to create that picture, because then you change your focus towards what you don't want to what you do. And then who do you need to become in order to achieve that goal? And we know that a lot of the magic is done in the process, not in the actual goal itself. It's the becoming. So see it as like a personal growth adventure. This is probably one of the most exciting adventures we can go on, self-discovery. So that would probably be where to start. Was that too much?
Not at all. I think that's a really great response ultimately. And it reminds me of, I think the author is Rick Hampson. He has a book called Just Resilient. And he kind of talks about really that mindfulness is kind of like a prerequisite for being a resilient person, because you've got to be aware of what's going on in your life, relating, to be able to understand what ultimately needs to change and what you have control of, what you don't have control of. So what you're saying there around awareness and stepping back, it really is, I think, the first step in order to understand how we then kind of move forwards. So I agree with all of that. The should
sorry,
problematic. That's okay. And then one thing that came up to me was, which I'd be interested in your thoughts, Annie, is kind of acceptance at the same time.
Oh God, yeah. Well, that's the journey. That is it, isn't it? Because once we're aware, we have to accept that. Acceptance is taken on. I mean, I learned about acceptance some years ago, but I'm still trying to accept. And actually, I heard someone say it was about forgiveness. No, it was about forgiveness, but it was Ashley C. Ford, and she's written a book on somebody's daughter. When she was little, she was beaten and beaten and beaten and had a terrible kind of childhood. And she was talking about forgiveness is the acceptance that it's no different than what you thought it was going to be, that the reality of the situation is what it is. And I think that is, acceptance is huge, because I think a lot of people think that, oh, acceptance is just that's the way it is and that's that. But it's not at all. It's ownership for me. It's ownership of the situation, because then you almost take the power back. What is my role in this situation? If I can accept it, I can change it. And I think that is the thing, that once we accept a situation, a big one is trying to change other people. You know, especially people around you that you love, that are part of your family and your close kind of circle. I know a lot of people that wish their relationships were different with their mum or their dad, you know, and they've learned so much looking back and going over the timeline, and it's really hard. You know, when you've kind of taken that step to go on this discovery journey and take steps forward and make progress and change, but it's almost like the people around you don't. It's like the puzzle pieces have changed, and it creates a bit of uncertainty, and it almost can create a little bit of, it feels like separation, because you're kind of soaring and progressing and changing, and they're the same. And I think sometimes we grieve for the relationship we don't have, but it is being able to accept people for exactly who they are. And I just believe that takes awareness, but it takes boundaries. Because if you can put loving boundaries, like boundaries is the gap between me loving myself and you, and loving you at the same time simultaneously, how can that coexist together? And I think if we put boundaries around our energy and we know who we are, we can show up for people that might be in different stages of their lives, different stages of their journey, and we can still have a relationship. But it's that acceptance that it might be different to how we've got the story we're telling ourselves in our mind.
Perfect. Yeah, I think acceptance has been a big one for me over the years. I know that sort of inattention that we sometimes can experience when ultimately we're not accepting that the current situation is the current situation, and that it should be different, or even that we just want it to be different. And there have definitely been some moments in kind of contemplative practice where you just feel that pressure subside within yourself, when you go, okay, I could just need to accept that this is the current situation. And then, as you've been discussing, I guess, think about what's in your control, what's not in your control, and then move forwards accordingly with kind of that meditation and reflection. And if you are able to have a coach or some level of support, then fantastic.
Yeah. And it's not easy, you know, as we go on this journey, stuff comes up all the time, and we almost have to come back to, okay, you know, what do I need to accept? What's going on here? How can I step into that ownership and focus on me? Another thing that I think is a big challenge is, you know, there's such a big focus on self-care and self-growth and self. But what I've learned as a mum and in my life is that you need other people. You know, if I come home all kind of enlightened and like relaxed from a massage that I've had, or a yoga or whatever, or I'm doing really well in my business, and Dan is unhappy or Bonnie's unhappy, that has a huge impact. So I think, like, for me, it's this mutual evolution together, especially as family units. How can we grow together? And that just kind of circles back to being the model and not the mirror. And also, I think this takes the pressure off trying to be this perfect mum, this perfect dad, who is, you know, forever kind of selflessly giving. That actually, by giving to ourselves, children benefit from the love we give them, but also the love we give ourselves. And I think that is a huge reframe and mindset shift, that we're investing in ourselves and our relationship, because children are always watching. They don't do what we say, they do what they see. And that is a gift to them. And I think sometimes we forget ourselves, we forget our relationships. We don't have the hard conversations. We don't have the loving conversations. We don't put the boundaries in place. We don't show up for each other. And a big one off the back of acceptance is accountability. It's accountability. Like, how can I be accountable here? And I think also in a loving way, it's holding other people accountable as well. Because a lot of the time people don't know, they're not as aware of their actions or their behaviors. And we don't have those deep conversations. We relate to each other from a social perspective, don't we? Hi, how are you? I'm fine. Yeah, whatever. But we don't sit down and truly relate on a deeper level. Like, how are you feeling? What's your story? Brené, that's another thing. Brené Brown said the other day on a podcast I was listening to is, you can't ever walk in someone's shoes. How often do you hear, like, you got to go to their bus stop, you got to walk in their shoes, and this kind of empathy thing? You can't. You'll never know what it's like to walk in someone's shoes. The only way you will know is if you ask them to tell you their story and believe them. And I think that is gold in terms of acceptance and accountability and fostering really healthy connections with people, is to move into hard, loving conversations, make them as hard as you want to be, and find out people have got opinions. Where have they come from? Tell me your story. Because it's hard not to like someone when you hear their truth, when you hear their story. And I think that's what we're missing from this whole culture of, which feels quite divided at the moment, and social media has playing a big role in that. But I think to have human contact and to listen to each other and hear each other's story and believe them, I think that's huge.
Yeah. And I really like the fact that you brought in kind of that, I guess, community relational element, because I guess some of what has been, some of what I've read, some of what I've been listening to, and something that's been really resonating with me recently is how sort of individualistic our society is. You know, there is a lot of kind of self-centered, either self-development very much focused on just the individual, or kind of what's wrong with me. Sometimes it's very self-focused in a negative way. And, you know, it's not that that's bad per se, but we've got to, as you say, integrate back into our relationships. And I think so many of our challenges are at the societal, cultural level. And it's hard to be a healthy individual within a collective which is struggling, and that has, you know, a society which is just pretty screwed up at the end of the day.
And I would just come back to the home and come back to your close kind of circle. And it's having the awareness around yourself and acceptance of self that you're able to move in and have those conversations with others. And what I would just say to people is, don't try and get it right. You know, it's messy. These conversations are messy. I'm the sort of person that will blurt out my life story within 5 minutes of having met you, or like, you know, they call it oversharing, but whatever, I'm just being honest. And sometimes I'll walk away and think, oops, should I have said that? But actually that's me. And people tend to like it. They tend to accept it. And I think, don't try and be a perfectionist about it. Don't feel you have to get these things right. If you need to make notes, or you want to like have a conversation with someone that's a bit challenging, be brave and take that step, because it is amazing what you get back. You almost open up this vulnerable side, which I think is where we build those bonds. And for children to be able to take the mask off and be vulnerable and be themselves and know they're going to be loved and accepted no matter what, I think that's really all we can do right now as parents. They're going to be the game changers that kind of change the world. But it needs to come from that place of self-worth and loving yourself. And I think we have so much power as parents over that by loving ourselves, but also opening up those conversations. There's no wrong parts. There's no bad parts. You belong no matter what.
Beautiful. And something that was coming up for me during that and what you were discussing previously is, can we truly kind of find and meet ourselves if we're not finding and meeting our tribe? In that sense that, you know, we're part of a community, we've evolved in small tribes, and therefore it's getting that. I think everything is about balance, you know, looking inwards while also looking outwards.
Honestly, that's where I totally agree. I think I've done a lot of self-healing, but what good of it if I'm stood in a circle of wounded, you know, people aren't happy. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's how we evolve together, because we can inspire and influence each other, and that has a ripple effect, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And our children are really why, because they're copying everything essentially. Like sometimes Bonnie will come in, it's like a mini me. I'm like, I do not know where she's learned that. Stupid idiot is her favorite word at the moment, and that might have come from a driving situation that I had. But they're watching us, and I can't get it across enough. It's not about being perfect. It's about being human and showing emotion, and that togetherness, that bond. I think that's so huge. There was a research study done about girls who had something bad happen, and the difference, I think it was around oxytocin, them texting their mum to tell them what happened compared to actually telling their mum or dad what had happened. And I think the bonding hormone, the oxytocin, was higher when they had that contact, when they had that connection. And obviously that has a huge impact then on the after effects of dealing with that, whatever that event was. But if we think about how online we are these days, we don't want our kids just to be communicating via text. We want to be having these real, honest kind of conversations the best we can. Like all I get from Bonnie when I pick her up is, I'm not telling you, but it's keep moving in, because if you work on yourself and know you're enough, you're not going to feel rejected. That's something that I suffer with, like this kind of rejection of, and I think that's going back to my 5-year-old me. But actually, if we feel confident and good in ourselves, we can keep moving in, even though they're telling us to like F off and stuff. We know that we're doing the right thing, not in a pushy way, but we're there, we're here, we're holding space, and we're interested. I said to Dan, every time Bonnie walks into the room, we need to act like it's the first time we've seen her, like at the airport, you know, when people come home, Bonnie's home. We have to keep reminding ourselves. But how amazing would that be if people did that to you? Some people might hate that, but I think it comes back to the significance that you're important, you're loved, like, I'm so glad you're here type thing.
Lovely. I like that. I'm going to bring that into our household, I think, as well, for everyone.
Yeah. I think like Tony Robbins says about walking into a room like you kind of are a rock star, or like I'm here type thing. But I think if someone else was to greet you, you know, especially in relationships where we tend to not put the investment and the time and the love into them when we become parents, to actually reignite that love story and that spark and be so happy, like when we were dating, to see each other, I think it's just so good for the esteem and how you feel about yourself.
Yeah, good for the soul.
Yes, soul medicine.
And I'm mindful of time.
Okay, yeah.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to kind of conclude with, or anything that you want to sort of maybe re-emphasize? No,
I think we've done good. Okay. We had a good conversation, didn't we?
Definitely did. And where can people find you if they're interested in maybe your new upcoming podcast or your website, social media?
Yeah, definitely watch this space. It's happening. I'm on Instagram as Annie Breen. I've not been on there for a while, had a bit of a break. And my website, probably the best place, is anniebreennutrition.co.uk.
Brilliant. And I'll put those all into the show notes as well. And do you have a launch date for the podcast yet? It
is supposed to be the 28th, but I'm still, after now I've just spoken to you, I'm going to go and record my episode. You've given me the motivation and some clarity. So end of March, beginning of April.
Okay, fantastic. We'll keep an eye out for it. Annie, thank you very much. It's been amazing to hear your journey and where you're at. So thank you for being so kind of honest and sharing all your wisdom.
Oh, no, thank you for having me on. It's been great to chat to you.